If you can give your name and just sort of give a short bio of your military and government and consulting careers.
Okay.
In sort of a resume sort of way, just so we have a sense.
Okay, my name is William John Pawelec, and I'm 56 years old. My background initially started in the Air Force in the mid-60s, where I was a computer operations and programming specialist first at Pope Air Force Base after training, and then in Vietnam. The first event in my lifetime occurred then that woke me to a new paradigm. That paradigm was that late at night, a young lady and I were in the woods in about 30 miles southeast of Fayetteville, North Carolina, and had an unusual experience with a UFO at about 300-foot distance. The UFO prompted, before it showed up, to have all the frogs, the crickets, and all those noisemakers late at night shut off like a light switch. And it appeared 20, 30 seconds later and passed by us at about 200-300 feet on a line only 40, 50 feet away from us, heading from a southeast to a northwest direction, about 11:25 at night. After it disappeared over the northwest end of a small lake we were by, there was a continued period of silence for another 20 or 30 seconds, and the frogs, crickets, and all the other noisemakers at night wound up turning back on like somebody again had thrown a light switch. That event was rather dramatic in my mind in that it prompted me to start questioning what was really going on in the world. This was a late night, clear night sighting up close, and it could not be mistaken for a helicopter or any other plane that I was aware of that the Air Force had back in '66. From that point on, I went to Vietnam and spent a lovely year there in the tropical resort community of Nha Trang, and got to meet a lot of nice people, particularly the Vietnamese. But in my work, we became very involved with processing and sending on to Washington intelligence data. This was in addition to our normal computer load of maintenance reports, payroll, etc. And in that situation, it became quickly evident that we could have fought this war at a much higher level and much more efficiently than it was intended. It became obvious to all of us that it was a political war and not to be won. After that experience, I left the military, in spite of the fact that almost everybody in the computer science arena was asked to stay on. In fact, the Air Force encouraged us by promising us 4-year college degrees fully paid, officer's salary while we're in, etc. But none of us stayed. Several years later, I got back into using my computer knowledge when my first wife had passed away in '77, and I was asked to come and help get a firm to grow called Rusco Electronics. In the late '70s, Rusco Electronics was the largest manufacturer and installer of access control equipment in the world. A friend of mine had asked me to help him because he wanted to leave the company and start his own company, and I said, yeah, I'd love to. You know, my wife had just died, and I was looking for something new to do. And it quickly became apparent that everybody in the security industry was back in the old relay days of philosophically and technologically, and that the industry did not have very many people with computer expertise. What quickly occurred in just a year or two is I went from doing corporate level work in the Denver area, which at the time was growing like a mushroom, to doing military work, national work, and getting my security clearance back and activated again. This led to doing a lot of work for the State Department, and eventually, by 1980, realizing that the firm I was with was about ready to be left in the dust technologically. We tried internally to convince them to upgrade their technology, and they would not. And I started my own firm with 2 other engineers in Denver, one from Hughes, who was based at the time at Buckley Air National Guard Base, which is actually a primary site for reception of satellite data for national security purposes. And another friend from Lockheed. Well, it was Lockheed Martin today, but it was Martin Marietta back in those days. We started the firm and developed within 9 months the most powerful electronic security system available at the time. In fact, we prided ourselves on having a form of Windows before Macintosh on our systems without any command codes. It's just punch and click and move windows around. And we did a lot of work. We, at one time, were doing 17, 18 major systems around the country. In fact, we did 5 alone for Federal Express, and we'd link these systems into a war room type environment back at their headquarters in Memphis, at the time called the Pony Farm, through a satellite link. We were one of the first ones to link security systems at separate sites back through satellite linkages. We time multiplexed with their data going back and forth for the shipping. And this led to a lot of other projects. And eventually, even when I finally left my own firm that we helped start in '84, I started working for Beltway Bandit type consulting firms. This would be SIC, Tracor, EGMG, etc., either as a contractor for them or as an employee for a period of time. It was at this time, again, that I realized that there was something amiss during this period of time when I was developing security systems out of a national security interest, in addition to large corporate systems. And I needed to find a security system in this marketplace as something that is as complex as any web network today. And the systems would run from $500,000 to $25 million just for the hardware. The systems that we worked on were starting to be placed in areas that surprised me. There was one particular project when I was at EG&G where we were tasked for designing a system for a base that, it amused me at the time, nobody seemed to be aware of in Nevada, called Tonopah Base, southeast of the little old mining town of Tonopah. And that this base was actually where the F-117s were kept when they went operational. They were never kept at Groom Lake. That was only for testing purposes. And that the entire wing was based there at the time. And our guys used to chuckle about the Revell model not being quite right. And what concerned me was that at this time there was a decision that we had to make on what was going on at Tonopah, and that there was a lot of facilities deep underground there that we secured. And there were elevators that would go up and down, very large elevators that could take craft, much like the elevators on an aircraft carrier, but on a land-based environment. And that these went very deep underground, and that the equipment that we could see underground around was not that which would run a normal aircraft, generators, air conditioners, etc. There was a totally different type of equipment. Now, one of the things that interested me after I left that project several years later was that they finally announced the F-117. And one of the concerns I would have is what is being done with Tonopah now. Because they were moved in a rush, a very big rush. Now, if I remember the number right, there was $75 million spent in only a 9-month period to prepare Holloman for the F-117s. Now, that's okay, but why the rush to get them out of Tonopah? Was some of the facilities that are deep underground becoming activated on a full-time basis, not just for testing purposes, and that they needed to remove those planes and those crews and support staff to Holloman and to prepare in a rather large rush for a new project to be brought in there. But none of the indications we had or my staff had that would actually install the security equipment had was like any other plane, even something as broad-ranging as the Aurora that we have all heard about to one degree or another. But I need to back up a bit. There is another subject I need to broach above and beyond the ufology subject that I got involved with that relates to this when we talk about alternative government control mechanisms. In that one of my favorite hobbies has always been tracking new technologies, and hopefully so it benefits in business. And in '79, living and working in Denver, I came across a company that, if necessary, I can provide documents for, that I've kept on file, of a company in North Glen, Colorado, which is a northern suburb of Denver, was developing an implantable chip originally for horses, because was a major problem then, and it may be still today, of shilling of horses. You would have two horses that look alike, and you would put the dog in, and you'd bet against him when everybody thinks it's the fast one, or you'd reverse that and bet against him. And he was attempting, through good faith, to develop a technology to give a unique signature to every single horse. That pill, if you want to call it that, intelligent pill, at the time was already small enough by then to implant under the skin with a horse needle, a large hypodermic needle. And I was shown these, and they worked. And we could read them with a primitive hand wand type reader from about 7 or 8 feet away. And this was still primitive technology. Excuse me. Now, at the time in the security industry, a lot of us had a lot of concerns about tracking and locating people that had been kidnapped, particularly what was going on in Europe at the time, where we were having NATO officers, even the Prime Minister of Italy, kidnapped. And these people were drained, or they were brutalized, or both. And one of the goals of the industry was to develop technology that would allow us to track these people or locate them quickly, hopefully to save their lives, but on a secondary basis to keep them from being drained of sensitive information. And I brought this technology to a meeting in a skiff room in Virginia that was arranged by a friend of mine with the CIA and another friend of mine with the State Department at the time, to introduce this technology to what we felt at the time were the right parties to use this new technology responsibly. Now, I hadn't heard about the remnant or any other religious beliefs at the time that said that everybody was going to be implanted with some sort of marking system, la the Beast or 666. I wasn't even aware of that stuff at the time. And I was taking this as a serious solution to a potentially problem that would not go away. And it was interesting. We met in this room, and because of the tight meetings we were involved with, certain people would not give you their